We spend a lot of time at work, close to 86,000 hours over a lifetime. It's essentially the equivalent of 10 years of our lives that we commit to this thing called work. And for a growing number of people, it's lone work. Working from home, living alone, driving alone, eating alone. What happens over a longer time horizon? A longer life. The authors of the 100-Year Life tell us that since 1840, we've been adding on 3 months of life expectancy every year. And in a more recent prediction, one researcher even said this. I actually did some calculations years ago and found that if we could cure human aging, average lifespan would be more than 1,000 years. Maximum lifespan, barring accidents and violent death, could be as long as 20,000 years. 20,000 years! Granted, none of this is happening anytime soon, so don't worry. Everyone here gets to die. I share this because this simple concept of a longer life is arresting. Whatever that outer range of life expectancy is, a longer life means a lengthening of our work lives. And that lengthening has already begun. Workers 55 and older are staying in the workforce at historically high rates, well into their 60s and 70s. How long we work is changing, and so is how we work. Technology is changing the very nature of work. We're seeing studies already showing that generative artificial intelligence will touch nearly every job in the workforce. And unlike in the past, when it was people without college degrees who were most worried about automation and job loss, today, a new kind of anxiety about unemployment has taken hold, and it is shared by both blue-collar and white-collar workers alike, those without college degrees, as well as those with college degrees. Technology's transformation of nearly every facet of our economy means that we are all going to have to build new knowledge and new skills at a pace and on a scale never before seen. And it's not slowing down. It's accelerating at an exponential rate. So the longer we work, the more tectonic shifts we might witness in quick succession. This future of work will be unsteady, and it will require constant adaptation. The skills we start out with will not be the ones we retire with. And the way we thrive in our work will have everything to do with how we learn. We're going to have to harness the power of education over and over again to ride out the potential disruptions of AI and automation. I study this space, but I am not a technocrat or an economist or a computer scientist. I have a secret past. I made a hard pivot after starting off my career as an English professor. So as you might imagine, my approach to the future of work is somewhat different. I've actually devoted most of my research to looking at this future from the perspective of those who are already being left behind. And that includes over 40 million Americans who maybe didn't go to college and are not earning a living wage. But because I am immersed in this space, people sometimes expect me to play the part of an oracle and somehow divine all the names of the jobs of the future, as well as name the precise skills we'll all need to be successful in that future. People really want to know what we should be doing. But it's the question of how we will work that is far more instructive. How do we live a life worth working? That's right, a life worth working. I've been leaning into this question because with a longer work life, we're going to have to navigate a very different way forward. We're seeing younger boomers retire with an average of 12 job changes under their belts. 12. So for younger generations, whose average tenure in a role is less than 3 years, they might contend with 20 or 30 or more job changes over a lifetime. And during at least one of those 20 or 30 career shifts, they'll likely wrestle with this question of how they find a sense of meaning and purpose in their work lives. I know I've grappled with this same question, having switched career paths not just once, but several times. This search for something more can haunt us. It can fill us with a sense of longing, discomfort, and doubt. And over the coming years, this questioning, this searching, will become a much more frequent occurrence as our careers extend in unfathomable ways. Finding a job is going to be hard enough. Finding stability will be even harder. But this idea of somehow finding and pursuing a fulfilling career, well, that just seems impossible. Fulfillment can feel like a luxury. It can feel especially elusive to those who might find themselves in jobs that make them feel drained, unseen, undervalued, and even used. And I don't see today's trending conversations about the future really tying together the survival of work and workers to the flourishing of our souls. We talk a lot about skills building, AI, career navigation, and the future of work, but something is missing. You and me, human beings with souls. I use this word souls as a placeholder for however you define your inner life, your spirituality, what moves or motivates you internally to behave in certain ways. And I use this word souls because I don't think we have enough ways of talking about how we align our inner lives, our values, and our passions to whatever kind of external-facing contribution we make in this world. We have a lot of ways of talking around this concept of soul because soul can sound like organized religion to some. And in the US in particular, there has been a significant decline in the number of adults attending any kind of religious service regularly. Young Americans are less likely to identify with any specific faith, and more people prefer to call themselves spiritual rather than religious. But this retreat from religion doesn't somehow mean that we don't need certain structures of community and frameworks of belonging and connection. Without them, we might find ourselves adrift. In general, we're spending more time alone. This is true across all age groups, but it's especially acute, this decline in social connections for those aged 15 to 24. In 2019, before the pandemic, we could already see that young people were spending 70% less time with friends than they were in 2003. And of course, COVID-19 just sped up that decline. Today, we are lonelier than ever. 50% of the population is experiencing loneliness. The Surgeon General has called this an epidemic of loneliness. And loneliness isn't just a feeling. It actually affects our mortality rates. It increases our likelihood of dying prematurely. Lacking social connections is just as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And when we are lonely, we seek out various ways to fill what feels like a hole in our lives. 50% of us try to distract ourselves with TV, social media, and podcasts. 26% of us eat more than usual. And a great many of us try to pay for wellness. We seek out wellness solutions like yoga, meditation, detox cleanses, and even bone broths. But we don't need to find some sort of strange concoction to ingest. We're not going to distract our way out of this loneliness. In a primal way, we are missing others. And we need to get back to the business of finding one another. We need authentic encounters. I'm borrowing this phrase from Pope Francis, who describes people as not actively engaged in a culture of authentic encounter. Our growing reliance on technology has turned us into mere passers-by on the digital highways, apart, closed in ourselves. Encountering is the opposite of closing in. Encountering requires caring that is pointed away from ourselves. And I wonder if this flourishing of our souls is tethered to this very simple concept of encountering others, of serving, helping, and loving others. Because I think it's safe to say that loving others isn't ChatGPT's superpower. But we humans, we could be first in love, as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put it. Dr. King upheld this idea of being first in love to contrast it with what he called our drum major instinct. That's this innate tendency within each of us to want to feel important, to stand out, and to lead. But Dr. King believed that we should use our lives to strive for what he called a new norm of greatness, to be first in love by being the greatest servant to others. In this 1968, in this stirring sermon, Dr. King ended up eulogizing himself, as this happened just a few months before he was assassinated. He mused about his own death, his own funeral, and he wondered what people might say about him. And he remarked, "I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody." To be first in love is a greater form of striving. To be first in love is to orient differently toward others. To be first in love is to practice the human skill that comes up the most in writings about the future of work: empathy. Empathy is our way into authentic encounters at work. Empathy is how we can work with purpose even when our work doesn't feel purposeful. And I'm deliberately saying practice empathy because we must. Even though it's innate within us, we are not necessarily proficient at it. In fact, we may be getting worse at empathy. Large-scale longitudinal studies indicate a rise in narcissism in our population. And with those rising rates of narcissism, we're also seeing empathy rates declining. And there is no crash course for empathy. Empathy requires consistent practice seeing from another's perspective, which is inordinately difficult to do these days when we find ourselves in echo chambers with algorithms pumping content at us with which we readily agree. We are rarely exposed to perspectives and viewpoints that challenge our own and even make us feel uncomfortable. We're not able to slow down and lengthen our attention spans. We are flooded with so much content that we seek out sound bites. We engage less with long-form writing. We read fewer novels. And this matters greatly because literature actually offers us one super cheap and compelling way of getting back to the practice of encountering others. Years ago, I taught literature to undergraduates, and I wish now in hindsight that I could have conveyed more to them about the future that awaited them. If anything, to assure them that those little paperback books they were holding could be one of the most powerful ways of experiencing a different reality. Fiction can empower us and emboldens us to enter into new territories and new worlds. When we read a novel, we are invited to escape our self-involvement and imagine being other people. We get to try on a life, eavesdrop, and inhabit the consciousness of someone who thinks radically differently from the way that we do. And we get to feel their private feelings. So if our ability to see things from another's perspective is diminishing, what better or more affordable practice than by immersing ourselves in these simulated worlds within a book? By the simple act of reading a novel, we can get back to the practice of encountering others by inhabiting other people's lives. And by nurturing our capacity for empathy, we prevent ourselves from turning inward or closing in ourselves. If this strategy seems small, it is. To remind us that we don't need to look too far afield for a sense of calling. Purpose might not lie in what sounds exalted. The soul of work can be small and tender and emerge in the most mundane of circumstances or through the smallest of exchanges. And in our search for meaning and purpose, we have to remember that clarity will not come from what we do for work, but from how we actively love, serve, and encounter others in a longer, more turbulent work life. Yes, thriving in an age of AI is going to be complex and not at all straightforward. But for now, AI models don't have a psyche. They don't have a moral compass. They don't even have common sense. We do. And more importantly, we have souls. We have the great privilege of caring for one another and feeling the feelings of others. Orienting ourselves toward others is how our souls will flourish. And at our funerals, 20,000 years from now, let somebody say that day that we tried to love somebody, that we lived a life worth working. Thank you.